Welcome to the second panel of the day. I hope you're having a wonderful time here at Art Mumbai on our day one of the speaker series. Thank you to the Kiran Museum of Art for sponsoring this and making this entire program possible. We wouldn't have these fantastic folks up here otherwise. Um, we've had an amazing conversation this morning, and there's so much learning that came out of it. But something that I think struck all of us is the incredible shift that's taking place, the movement towards not just India and South Asia, but the but the focus on South Asian art, cultural conversations, and general interest in this part of the world. It's absolutely unprecedented. One of the areas where we find there's been a significant amount of development is education. And as many of us have discussed earlier, it is critical in order for us to be able to take it to the next level. And in particular, as these educational initiatives are funded as they're created, sorry, I have a little bug on my screen. Um, I think we're getting into a phase of beginning to shape the next generation, not only of cultural practitioners, but scholars, of folks that are going to be building out the larger art ecosystem. And I'm not going to get too much into that because our fantastic moderator is going to structure this discussion. But I'm going to actually start with introducing the panel briefly. We have with us Shanthi Kandiah, who is the founder and managing partner of Shanthi Kandiah Chambers. And as protector of the Creator Foundation, she's been instrumental in supporting education, healthcare, and arts initiatives across Malaysia, India, Sri Lanka, and Indonesia. She is also the co-founder of the Alaka Foundation and a trustee of the World Wildlife Fund in Malaysia. Together with her husband Bramal, and they're both really good friends and have been involved in the arts, they have both endowed the Vidya Daheja Professorship of South Asian Art at Princeton University. And she's going to talk about where that's taken them and their journey onwards. We're also very privileged to have Ashish Dhawan, who is the founder and CEO of the Convergence Foundation. Before focusing on his philanthropic career, Ashish was one of India's most successful private equity investors as he founded and led Chris Capital, the country's premier PE firm. Just as an aside, this was the first investment into saffron art 24 years ago. So we've known each other a long time. And today is founding chairperson of Ashoka University and the Central Square Foundation, and a member of the Gates Foundation's governing board. Ashish continues to transform India's education and social sectors. Our third panelist is Lydia Yee, who is a curator based out of London. She's an art historian and a museum consultant. She's currently director of Moira Arts. She's a senior curatorial advisor to YDP and a member of the external faculty for new curators. Lydia has previously held curatorial positions all over the place in London and New York, and has served as chief curator at the Whitechapel Gallery. She's been a curator at the Barbican, a senior curator at the Bronx Museum of the Arts, and a recipient of the Asian Cultural Council Individual Fellowship last year. She's also a member of the Turner Prize jury in 2024, and was co-curator of Frieze Talks in 2018 and 19, and the British Art Show. And our last panelist, but not least by any means, is Deepanjana Klein. She is the special advisor to the chairperson and she's director of acquisitions and development at the Kiran Museum of Art. In this capacity, she's spearheaded major collaborations with leading international institutions. And as we heard Kito DeBoer say this morning, KNMA seems to be everywhere, and that's largely in part thanks to Deepanjana, who I like to call the international woman of mystery in the art world. But she's, created collaborations with the Barbican in London, the Museum of Modern Art in New York, Qatar Museums in Doha, and she's worked on building and strengthening KNMA's global institutional partnerships. So it's taking a bit of India's and the subcontinent's footprint all over the world. And finally, our moderator is Mukti Khere. She is the Girish and Jaydev Reddy Professor of Practice at Cornell Tech and the Cornell S.C. Johnson College of Business. Mukti is an economic sociologist who studies the creation of new markets by pioneering entrepreneurs in creative and industrial industries. Also, an aside on her, Mukti in 2005, 2006, wrote, when she was at the Harvard Business School, wrote a case study on saffron art. So these are long friendships, and it's amazing to see everyone up here on stage as we have this discussion. So Mukti is very interested in exploring art, fashion, film, music, and publishing as part of these creative industries. And her research has shed light on how entrepreneurs leveraging technologies in these industries in particular has changed the structure and functioning of these industries. Her book, Culture and Commerce, The Value of Entrepreneurship in the Creative Industries, was named one of Forbes' top 10 books on creative leadership. And she's going to lead us in this discussion on where we're headed in terms of not just funding our futures, but what that really looks like in the landscape. So please join me in welcoming this fantastic group of people up here.
I'm going to do the, okay, it is on. Thank you very much, Manal, for that wonderful introduction. Thank you to all our panelists for being here. Uh, I'm going to start by talking a little bit about why we should worry about funding future. Not worry. I'm not going to say worry. Why we should even spend time thinking about funding futures. And for that, allow me and indulge me to give you a quick overview of some of the research I've done because I think it's really pertinent to what we're doing. One of the things I found as Manal was discussing, I have looked at how entrepreneurs create new markets, and most of the times when I say that, people think, "Oh, one entrepreneur comes up, starts a company about something new, and voila, a market is created." It's actually really not that. For a new market to be created, what I found was you need an entire ecosystem of entities, not just the buyers and sellers, which typically in economics would be okay, you have your buyer, you have your seller, you have supply and demand, there'll be a price created, and again, you'll have a market. But in every market, but especially in things like art and other creative industries, the thing I found was that what was really important was another set of entities, these third party sources of information, education, evaluation of the product, endorsements of the products, so that people understood. And this was especially important when it was a new market, things or a new product that things people didn't understand. It was really important for these third parties to exist in the ecosystem so that both buyers and sellers had more information that allowed them to engage in transactions. So, as a quick example, we'll move away from art for a moment because we'll talk about it much more now. But think about a book. You don't know before you've opened the book whether it's good or bad. You wait for someone, it's there in the market, somebody has put it out there, but has a publisher has put it out there, but you look for reviews, you look for someone to tell you who's read it, someone who you trust to talk about this. And then especially in things like art, it's not just the reviewers, but a longer tradition of people who have taught us how to think about art, in the case of books, how to think about books and literature, museums, in the case of art, that tell us what is important, what is valuable, both historically as a progression and so forth. And that's the ecosystem that actually contributes in large part to creating a market. And I think what we have here, interestingly enough, is that set of ecosystem players that are uh, sometimes buyer, sometimes seller, but in the whole process, actually creating an information resource, an education resource that allows everyone to understand. In this particular case, what is modern Indian art? what is contemporary Indian art? How do we place it in context, in the global context, in the Indian context? How do we think about quality? How do we think about value? And then aesthetically as well as economically. And that's sort of how markets get created. And which is why, if you want a sustained market to exist, not just a flash in the pan transaction, we need to be funding of the futures by funding these ecosystem players. Art Mumbai is exactly one of these ecosystem players. People come here, someone who's never maybe seen modern Indian art or contemporary Indian art comes here, gets a sense of what's out there. There's a curation involved, and that's what creates sustained markets for this. So I want to sort of open up and talk a little bit about these things, because we have people here who have been uh, doing this and being entrepreneurs in the sense that I talk about, because you have helped in creating these markets. So I'd love to start with Ashish to talk a little bit more about sort of the role of educational institutions, and then we'll talk to Lydia in creating these connoisseurs and artists and curators, and how we should think about that.
Thank you. So I think in India we had a great tradition of education with the ancient universities, Nalanda and Takshila, Vikramshila, and they were really centers of liberal learning with a great focus on the humanities. And somewhere down the road, particularly in the recent past, the pendulum swung too much in the direction of technical education, and we need that, by the way. But we sort of ignored the humanities. And I think slowly the pendulum swinging back. So I do feel that it's not just students majoring in the arts, whether it's visual, performing arts, but that every student should have an exposure to the humanities. And that's very, very critical. So they come out appreciating aesthetic beauty, they come out with an understanding of philosophy, our own rich history and civilization, the connections with the rest of the world, etc. So we at Ashoka are deeply committed to that, but I think there are many other institutions now in India doing the same.
Thank you. And this aesthetic education more broadly leads to future connoisseurs, future the funding the future, but it's not even directly necessarily about the monetary funding, but it's an investment in creating a sustained interest in the art. And Lydia sort of takes it at the to the next level, so to speak.
Well, I would like to maybe start by reeling back to the past. And I think the last session ended with this metaphor of it when is the best time to plant a tree. And yes, you have to look backwards and look at what its impact is 20 years later, but also imagine what the future impact can be. So maybe going back more than 20 years, I was the beneficiary of a grant or a funded fellowship from the National Endowment for the Arts in New York at the New Museum in the 1990s. And they had a program to diversify the field of art historians and participants in the arts. So I got a 1-year fellowship at the New Museum of Contemporary Art, and there weren't that many Asians in the field. Although I did have one mentor who was an assistant curator at that museum, and that really made an impact on me. That program sadly ended after a few years. The U.S. government's funding is often up to the whims of whoever's in the decision-making seat, as we currently know now. But when I arrived in London in the 2000s, I was very heartened to see that they had a similar kind of program, which was a partnership between the Arts Council and the Royal College of Art. So a group of students received a similar fellowship to study curatorial studies, which is largely, upper middle class area of study. But these kids, well, not kids, but 20s, got this opportunity to go through the Royal College of Art's master's program in curating and also get funded and get a work placement in the Barbican at Tate, at V&A. So really good professional placement as well. That program ended after a couple of years. So I think the thing I want to emphasize is that the need for, sustained education, sustained investment in our institutions, whether that's public or private. And I do see a shift towards more perhaps privately funded initiatives. And one example is the new curators course in London that's led by two former Take curators. And they fund 10 to 12 fellowships annually. It's not a degree granting program, but the participants get paid to work in this program for a year, and they get the equivalent of a master's degree in terms of training and work experience. And in the past 2 years, they've had students from not only North America and the UK and Europe, but also several students from India, the Philippines, Vietnam, Senegal, the Caribbean, Brazil. So super diverse. And these young people are also building their networks, which I think is very important. And I think in 20 years, we'll see where that tree grows and how.
So this is privately funded?
It is privately funded. Every year they have to raise money to support these positions.
And it's a great segue to go to Shanthi and Deepanjana. And I'll start with Shanthi just a little bit to say, you've been in this sort of private funding of some of these, again, ecosystem players, funding the future connoisseurs, artists, curators. What drives you to do that?
Wow, I wasn't expecting that as a postgrad. What drives it to do that?
I don't expose all the cards right at the beginning, but
What drives us? I guess it's the need and the opportunity to help
yeah,
and create impact.
Yeah.
I think that in a nutshell is why we choose to fund this. Of course, my husband and I both
Yeah.
love art, so that's underlying all of that. Yeah, I would
And
say.
how do you think about what to fund, right? Because we're looking at, so Ashish talking about sort of an aesthetic education, Lydia talking about sort of specifically curators, so that we have that next level of the value. How do you decide what is important in this ecosystem to fund?
I think for us, it's at least Ramal and I thought that there was scope for deeper study into the traditions of art of South Asia generally. And we are now going back to whether it's Buddhist or Islamic or Hindu or Jain traditions. I mean, the list is endless. And while we know various universities in the West have departments dedicated to this, I'm not, what I'm trying to say is there's certainly scope for more, deeper, more visible study into this space. And perhaps I can touch now on our decision then to fund a chair in South Asian art history. And we named it after a professor who has dedicated her life. She was with Columbia University, Professor Vidya Dehejia, and we've called it the Professor Vidya Dehejia Chair of South Asian history, art history. We went on to leave it with Princeton to then identify the right candidate for the role. And I think we were quite clear throughout that the focus was South Asia as a collective. They went on to hire an associate professor whose background was primarily focused on Islamic art and art of Pakistan. And was it what we had intended for them with this gift? Definitely not. But we also have to maintain that line, that balance between pushing our way through and respecting their right to academic freedom and choices. And so here's the issue about when we chose Princeton. Why Princeton? They are a highly, I mean, the global reach, the structural capacity that they have. Um, we felt that the study would become more visible and perhaps correct perhaps some of the underrepresentation of study into South Asian art. But I guess what it lacks definitely is I can't think of the right word, but I keep wondering how to say this. But perhaps the authenticity of the study is somewhat lacking. It's not what we had intended, and we would have loved for a broader study, and certainly to leave Indian art out. And they may not leave it out, but the problem might be that the candidate that they're chosen will struggle for whatever geopolitical reasons to access Indian sites, Indian art, to actually visit these sites. And was any of this considered more thoroughly? And so moving forward, we decided to do this another way. And we have now worked on creating a Southeast Asian / South Asian focused museum out of Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. That's our home. And this time we're doing it organically from within the country. And I think here the fact doing it locally, what we're seeing is just far more intuitive understanding of where we're coming from, which I think you're always going to struggle with when you deal with an um, external institution. Thank you.
Thank you, Shanthi, because this is a great segue to Dipanjana, who can tell us, being on both sides of that equation of being at Christie's, albeit within the South Asian the department, but then now seeing it from this side of and what the differences were, what were the pros and cons of each side.
Thank you. You know, because I've straddled both sides, it gives me a perspective of what we actually need on the other side. Because the market grew very organically. And today we are seeing the results of that, what we were building 15, 20 years ago, whether it was Christie's, Saffron, all the auction houses that had a great infrastructure that could bring in specialists and talent. And then when you look at it from the other side, now we are into institution building. This is where we are at today is what Lydia was referring to 20 years ago, where US or in London, there was no funding. However, we are in a privileged position at Kiranadar Museum of Art to actually make that change. We sit under the Shivnadar Foundation, which has been very generous to us. And what we are lacking in this country is how to make professionals in the museum world. We don't have good curatorial programs. Of course, Ashoka University is sending some great students to us. But JNU has some good program, Shantiniketan, Baroda. But how do we reach those people? How do we bring them? None of these art history students are being told how to be out as a museum professional. So what we've decided to do, mostly for our own selfish reason, because we are going to have this 1,000,000 square feet museum, we need people. We need well-trained people. So we are focusing on capacity building. We are focusing on upskilling. So for upskilling our own curators and existing colleagues, we have partnered with different institutions and foundations around the world where we can send our curators, let's say, to Delphina Foundation, where they can interact with curators from all over London and learn. Or we are partnering with MoMA for their international curatorial programming. so that our curators can go and learn. With Ashmolean, for our conservators to go and learn how to handle pigments in a classical Indian painting. So for upskilling, this is our focus. But how do we bring all that knowledge back to India? So now we are partnering with institutions in America. Let's say Arizona State University or the BARD, which has one of the best curatorial programs, where we can bring in professors from there and make it accessible, make that knowledge accessible to not just our employees, but to students from Delhi or anywhere from India. We can give fellowships. So this is our dream. This is what we are working on. And as I said, we are in need of that capacity building. So it's stemmed from there. And now we are going for campus recruitment. We've decided we are going to go from one campus to the other and bring in talent, give them fellowships, have them trained at the museum so that we can absorb them and they are ready as we open our doors.
This is fascinating because as you were talking, I was thinking about this question of, so we're going to have all these professionals curating great museums, etc. Who is coming there? And I don't mean to sound, sorry, it sounds, I don't mean to sound facetious, but we often see this, that travelers go from India to other places, visit all the museums. It's like you were collecting all those tokens or whatever it is nowadays that you get for a museum entry, but they haven't seen the NGMA even or any of the museums here in India. How can we create, and I'm looking at Ashish, but I'm also just broadly, how do we create this sense among the people to be able to appreciate art from around us? So either just India or around other parts of South Asia, Southeast Asia. What can we do? Lydia can take it away. Yes.
I think young people know what museums are. If you go on TikTok or Instagram, they're doing fantastic things to, show off what they've seen, what they've learned. So I think we need to, think about the young people of today are very different from our generation who maybe it was a little harder to get into the museum, let's say. So I think we just need to kind of encourage that and, also like find ways for them to engage with the content. I mean, most of us probably can cite an experience where we went into a museum and we felt connected to what we saw on the walls. And that's the only way you can do it, really. If you connect with the audience, they will come.
I think it's a little bit what Kiran was saying, which is if you build them, they'll come. I think supply creates demand. I mean, and educating students, getting them exposed early on, like the school programs and with university students, will go a long way if you can start early. I'll give you a couple of examples. We thought there was limited demand for a China studies program, and this is not just in economics, but actually looking at cultural connection. And we offer a minor in this area, and you won't believe how many students actually show interest. So you create the supply, and there is real interest. Or we just created a program around Deccan studies to send students to the Deccan to study archaeological sites and the art and history of the place. And I think young people have varied interests. So I like Lydia was saying, I would bet on the youth of India. And I think if you create these interesting spaces and you educate them, give them some exposure, they'll soak it up.
If I could add here, you know, when we were growing up, I'm dating myself. When we were growing up, we were expected to go to a museum and we were following a narrative that we were shown. The entire audience of the generation we are talking about, the Gen Zs, it's completely changed. My daughter goes to a museum and she creates her own experience. She'll find her own TikTok moment. She'll find her own aha moment. And the curators are there to present something to you. But today's audience is creating their own experience when they go to these institutions. And there are different ways. I mean, the footfall, it's a million dollar question. Nobody knows. We can build an institution. Who's going to come? We don't know. But we are doing outreach programs all around Delhi just to get them prepared that there is this incredible institution coming. And M Plus is a very good example of what they did when they started the museum. They've created a whole space. Even before you see art, you can go hang out there. There are kiosks with cafes. There are seats, very comfortable seats. There's Wi Fi, free Wi Fi. So, guess what? All the young people hang out there. So, M Plus is always crowded. And then, if they feel like it, they'll go up and do a selfie and maybe see some art. So, there are different approaches institutions are taking.
And Shanti, what is you mentioned starting from within, right, for your foundation and museum. What do you think is the importance of being so hyper local, right? So or immersed in this local world, so for attracting people, because again you have this thing, where what you're familiar with, you devalue when you look at something that came from outside. You think, oh, this is really valuable, important. How do you think about that balance?
Um, I personally believe that if it's good, people will come. And I'm not as concerned about footfall for our museum. We took a deliberate decision to create a museum of Southeast Asian art because that gives us more depth and a lot of unexplored territory around similarities, differences, common histories, shared histories. And I think that will give Lydia and her team a lot of curatorial space. So I'm not worried about that. But to echo what Lydia said earlier, I think we have to meet the audience at how they consume news and information and awareness. So, for example, with Gen Z, I've seen amazing things with what museums around the world are doing now, using social media to make the art more relatable and relevant and fun. And sometimes I've even seen them pick up on TikTok trends, around cats, and all of a sudden paintings with cats on it appear. And the next thing you know, that there's a direct impact on the number of people who've been to that museum. So it's really having that digital director and that communications person is going to be key for that. I suspect. Yeah.
To get more people.
I'll give you another example from a different space, the heritage space. So the government started this sort of public-private partnership with historical monuments in Delhi. And a friend of mine, Puneet Dalmia, he's got the Red Fort and Purana Killa and all these other monuments. So they just started. They did a first musical evening at the Safdarjung's tomb, beautifully lit up. There's another one coming up on Saturday, and people are now enjoying the monument, a monument they hadn't been to before. They now discover the beauty of these spaces, and they're going to go more often. They did a Garba night at the Purana Killa and priced it even. There was a low ticket price because young people could come. Thousands of young people came to enjoy the space, and it was a beautiful, and they'll go back. It's a place they didn't know about. They didn't know existed in Delhi. And the Red Fort now has a museum and actually has a show every evening. And so I think you do these kinds of things, you create these experiences. This is an example and this is just the beginning. We're only scratching the surface here.
Maybe one thing to add, that Mora Arts, I think one of the visionary things that Bramal and Shanti did was found it in a location that's very kind of integral to the city. It's in the city center. It's an area that's developing now, but had a lot of abandoned properties. And they're also putting in other arts organizations, a theater eventually, and incubator spaces, residency spaces. The most popular bakery is around the corner. I think all of these things attract young people. It's not just to, they'll come for one thing and they'll discover the museum. And I think that's important, that it's not like some distant destination where they, have to go a long distance, but I think they'll discover things just by being in that neighborhood.
If I may, I'll pick up on this access, public-private partnerships and access. How do we make it accessible, both monetarily, and I know we talked about a little bit about the accessibility through making it social media friendly, and etc. But how do we then balance this thing? And we discussed this earlier. How do we balance the art as entertainment versus art as enlightenment, art as all of those great things that we are moved by it, we connect with it. How do we ensure? And I'm not being a prude about it. I'm happy for art as entertainment, but how do we ensure that also it doesn't get devalued as mere entertainment in some way? So I'm thinking of access in both terms. How do we make sure that these things are available for people with more modest means, younger, but also just more modest means? But also, how do we get them to appreciate it for also what it is, as opposed to a backdrop for something else, or a backdrop for their own social media narrative, backdrop for other experiences, etc.
Should I take that first?
Yes.
So we've been thinking about it a lot because Mrs. Nadar has been diversifying her collection she started with contemporary, modern and contemporary. Now it's classical. It's not just miniatures, it's sculptures as well. Then it's folk and tribal, it's textile. So how do we make all of this accessible? How do we knowledge share? How do we build scholarship on all of this? So one of the first things we have to do, not just think about, we are not trying to dumb it down, because I think it's unfair to think our audience is not ready to take in all of this intellectually. So instead, we are spending time and effort and research, bringing in scholarship, but how do you make that knowledge accessible? So, for example, we have a collection of pages from the Fraser album. Not everybody knows what these pages are, but how do you teach the people? How do you educate your audience about Fraser album? These are some of the most important paintings from the colonial period. So we were thinking, as we were acquiring these pages from Fraser albums, we thought, okay, when you look at these people in the Fraser album, for example, we just were lucky enough to get one from the Aga Khan sale, 8 horsemen. If you see those men standing there, they're very good looking, which helps. But aside from that, if you see their textile that they're wearing, you can do a whole textile show. And India is so rich with textile. Every lady in this room is wearing a beautiful textile. So one can relate. It's a lived in experience of seeing something and saying, oh, I have that ikat. Or my grandparents have that. My grandmother used to wear that sari, or the turban is like what my grandfather wore. So you have to make that connection where someone walks in is not intimidated by what they're seeing, even if they find it beautiful, but how can they make it their lived experience? So it's a challenge, but we're working on it.
Maybe to add that I don't know any children who walk into an art gallery or museum feel intimidated by the art, especially very young ones. They're touching everything, they're running around, so I think we only become intimidated later in life, or maybe when we, 10, 12 years old. I think it's important to create a continuous journey of learning and experiencing art from very young age, but through, the difficult years of an adolescent and then on to, young adulthood, because that continuity, keeps you engaged with art.
Shanthi, I saw you.
And perhaps I just wanted to add on, exposure to art and what it might do to you. I mean, we started our journey in collecting with the first Indian Arts Summit in New Delhi. I had a yoga class and I thought I'll just pop in. I was not a serious collector by any stretch of imagination. We liked art. We had bought art, but nothing of the scale that we then started down the path on. And it was the Indian Art Summit. So kudos to you, Minal and Dinesh, because I think it's these types of events and the venues that spaces that you create to allow people to come and take that first step. And that first step led to all sorts of things. Brahmal loves antiquities and particularly bronzes of the South. And when was he first exposed to it? At a friend's home. He was greeted by a beautiful Nataraj. And as he entered the home, and he's like, "Oh, what's this?" And then that journey of learning, reading, getting to know. So I think for everyone, you create the space and you make it. You don't make it intimidating, but welcoming, and people will find their ways. Some may do it at a superficial level. Some may approach it and want to learn more and get into it in more depth.
So I think obviously people will build private museums, and Kiran's of course doing an amazing job. But I think there's a PPP model as well, with because government has a lot of assets, particularly antiquities, and I think there is this new PPP model. Actually, it's very much about access. So the ticket price is still extremely low during regular hours, and it's only after hours that you can do special events and you can price differentially. You can do Sunil Mittal just did a board meeting in the Red Fort. It was a special experience he had some international folks come, priced very differently. So there's model, but the footfall hasn't gone down one bit because the access is still very much the same as it was before. You've got to make sure again that there's a certain sensibility, there's certain do's and don'ts, there's certain guardrails. Money from the special events goes into an escrow account that then is used for the maintenance of the site. It isn't taken out. So there is a model that can get developed. And I think the private partnership can really help in ensuring that these things are, taken care of. We were just talking about, I was in Tanjore just earlier today. I mean, beautiful bronzes. Again, what could be done with that space is with the private sector coming in, and the footfall you could get would change dramatically. But again, all of that should go back and get plowed back into that space itself. And that model it's by trial and error, it's getting developed as we speak. And some state governments are doing it as well, not just for the ASI monuments.
And Lydia, have you seen other, apart from great examples of this being executed well, but also other models, innovative models of funding this kind of access anywhere else? And then I want to hear if Deepanjana, you've taken any inspiration from other models and so forth.
I mean, I have to say, you have to put your money where your mouth is or where your head is.
Yeah.
If you believe in something, find the ways to support it. It doesn't, it could be a small contribution. It could be helping a young person find out about a program that could change their life. So I think enabling in some ways is very important in this field. And that's, I think, maybe one of the reasons why I've left the public sector, because you can have that much more impact in some ways in working privately. In a new developing market, a new economy where everyone's open to art. In the UK and the US, people are a little bit perhaps jaded. I don't know, from going to museums or consuming culture, but I don't see that in Malaysia at all. Everyone's so excited to have a new museum on their doorstep. And we're really trying to build from the ground up with the local ecosystem. And thus far, I'm the only one on the team who doesn't live in KL at the moment.
Funding is not easy. there are fellowships that are being funded privately. I was really surprised to see in two places where Indian philanthropists are funding Indian students to go, let's say CMAM, which is one of the most important conferences for museum professionals. And as I was looking through, there's travel grants, there's different kinds of fundings, and we saw Indian names there. And it was so thrilling to see. And they're not necessarily giving it to Indian students, they're giving it to anyone who's meritorious. And we're seeing more and more of that, where there are private collectors, private philanthropists who are interested in liberal arts, who are interested in promoting it. Even at the MoMA International Curatorial Program, there are so many names out there that are from India who are funding these curators to study there or spend 2 weeks in symposiums with curators from around the world. But I think there are still very few. There's a long way to go. But the good news is there are many museums, private museums opening in India. So there is a need. So just like us, where we are thinking of upskilling and capacity building, I don't think it's foreign to any of the other institution builders. We need it. So there has to be private funding that has to come in.
And we talked a lot about sort of fellowships, etc. But can we talk about sort of funding the ecosystem instead of just individuals? It's not an either or, but can we combine? And I know a museum is part of that ecosystem, institution building is part of that ecosystem, but is there a model that we've seen where it is not just funding for, and I'm looking at Ashish because I'm thinking, put on your Chris Capital hat, Ashish, and think about, is there a way to be a private investor in an ecosystem that has public impact?
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think, yeah, I'll have to think about that. I don't know. I mean, no, but what I was saying is, I mean, building something that's sustainable in the arts. I think in education there are models where you can come closer to sustainability, but with the arts, I think it's harder.
It's hard. What do you think, Shanthi?
Well, Brahmal's sitting right here, and we should put him on the spot for this. But I think it's going to be a balance between commercial opportunities within the space and ticket sales, and there's always going to be a component of for philanthropy. I think it's, and how we structure that. Of course, the pressure on us would be to keep ticket prices as low as possible, and those are the things that we're going to have to work out as we go forward. But in the square that we are redeveloping, where these museums, and I would invite all of you to Malaysia post-September to come and visit our new museum. But in the square that we are redeveloping, the idea would be for the commercial operators, the F&B, retailers, to perhaps make some contribution to the museum, the not-for-profit spaces, which would be the performing arts theater and the museum. Yeah, so it's going to be a combination.
I'm sorry, I've got a flight at
No,
5.
yeah.
If it's okay, I'll exit while you.
No, I want you to give me, if you don't mind, one quick last thought. You said you have great optimism because of India's youth. I would love for you to elaborate on that, of sort of what do you see the future in that? And you can make one sentence and
No,
yeah,
I
right.
think as a young Indian, it's the greatest time to be alive because we're going to be in a country that's going to grow,
Yep.
for the next 30, 40 years. And we're going to be in a part of the world, I think in the center of gravity of the world is moving to Asia. And so I think there's so many opportunities. It's not just in the business world, it's in the arts, in government, in so many spheres. And so much to learn and so many connections to build across the region. So that's what I'm excited about.
Yes, thank you. Ask a question.
No, I know you have to leave, but just what do you think of the Yuva? No, the museum the government is setting up. Yoga Yogendra. Yoga Yogendra. The yeah, you got it right. Okay, I got it right. Yoga Yogendra, which is the North Block and South Block in Delhi, are going to be converted into the largest government run museum, which they think they'll have ready within a year. Uh, yeah, that's what their aspiration is. But what do you think of the concept, and what do you think? What is the art they're going to show?
I thought you'd know more than me, correct?
I thought you might. I thought you might have.
No, I don't. Look, it's a beautiful space. I don't know what they're going to
It's a
show.
beautiful.
It's a beautiful,
space,
beautiful space.
and they're consulting various. I mean, I think they got Louvre as one of the consultants, but it's a bit mystifying. What is the art they're going to show? Where is the art coming from? What is they going to put? Are they going to bring it? So, I mean, people who are going to have some say should get involved with.
No, I think it's a good push. I'll try to find out. I haven't paid attention to it, but I just
who are involved in university.
no. It's going to be a very important space. So
And if they're going
it's
to
worth-
do it and they do it well, then it's going to be something
Absolutely.
important. But if they make a hash of it, it's going to be very sad.
No, thanks. Sorry, I like.
No. Absolutely. Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you for coming. I'm gonna just take what he said and ask all of you a last question around this notion of youth, who are going to be the future of the art market, both on buying, selling, institution side, and the region that we're in that he mentioned is the core of sort of where the center of gravity is shifting. How do you see that? Do you believe that to be true? Do you believe that maybe to be true in the future through all of these efforts? And how do you think about that, Deepanjana?
I think the shift has already happened. So if we look back, let's say my days at Christie's 15, 18 years ago, um, we were going from one South Asian country to the other as specialists looking for artists and art from those regions because we really believed that we had to have a catalog that represented the region. When we started going and bringing things at auction, that's when we also saw curators from the region started going to those artists. So it happened in a kind of reverse manner. For example, we were the first people who offered Zarina. Zarina Hashmi, or Zarina as we call her, had no shows, no exhibitions. And then one or two seasons, we placed her works at auction. And then, collectors actually started seeing her works. And she's never looked back since. Her works, I mean, have become so hard to collect today. So the shift has already happened. Now we are following the curators around the world. Institutions are coming here. They are here for Kochi Biennale. They're here for Art Mumbai. They're here for India Art Fair, looking at this region, studying this region. So this had to happen. It was bound to happen. And more, you see artists of our region being represented fairly well in institutions around the world, not just west facing, but also within our region.
So that's a really important distinction, Lydia.
I think if we look back like 20 years ago, we've noticed how much the world has changed. And it's hard to exactly imagine what it will look like in 20 years from now. But one thing I can say is that it's become so interconnected, and not just because of the web, but you just see like how this region is connected to the East, is connected to the Middle East. So it's not, I think we're much more stronger like a textile when we're all woven together than when we're one thread hanging on its own. So, I'm very optimistic about the future and the changes happening.
I'm going to wrap up. Are we taking questions from the audience? Yeah, absolutely. I don't, does someone have a, go ahead. You have a microphone is coming. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you. That was really thought provoking in the sense like if you look at a gallery, like take a snowball in Bombay, the foot falls on a preview, and the next day, when the light is at the best in the morning, it's like you're looking at Jogen Chaudhary as though you own the entire gallery. Or you take, say, a BDL, which is having an exhibition right now, a public project, or even the museum with all its city centric work. Now, when I was listening to you all, there were three things that popped in my head. One is advocacy, which would begin right at the initial level, which is a topic that has been taken. But I was thinking more, not just the entire ecosystem of, say, the visual art, but the entire multi streams, which could be in culture as a grassroots syllabi in primary education, considering India does not necessarily have all the IBs all across, and that is where all the talent is. And I mean, that is exactly the most challenging task, to have an advocacy program for primary education right there. The second was a point that we are talking about the youth, but our generations are getting younger. At 40, that could be a stream wherein, like, say, you're looking to at 60 and you're at your prime in 60. You are capable, you are free, you are free from responsibility. And I mean, there's so much you can do. So I think that is one which we have not really looked at entirely. Like when I go to any museum, the first thing that strikes me is there a ramp? Is the toilet good enough? How many steps am I going to climb before I look at that place? Can I get somebody who's 85 and I'm interacting with 85 and 94-year-old people who are at the top of the game? And there are so many things in terms of investing in change. We are talking about Gen Zs, we are talking about TikTok, we are talking about street art and it being covered with Instagram floods and everything like that. But there are so many other things. Like, I mean, even grandmothers take their kids out. Like when I was in the Mac Michael, in the line up there, right up to 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning, there were only elderly people. And we call them elderly, but they're aging and actively aging. So that is a huge stream which I don't think we are addressing at all.
I think it is being addressed, and especially since we are building this new museum, these are things we are very carefully thinking about because and in fact, today, where we sit at Saket, even today, our workshops, weekend workshops, are not just geared toward children from schools, but for their grandparents to come and also engage with us. So the children coming from school can inspire their grandparents to come to the museum, and vice versa. If we do workshops for elderly, as we're calling them, we can engage them and they'll bring their families as well. How do you make the space accessible? As you said, ramps and all of that. The wayfinding is being thought of very carefully. If you heard Mrs. Nader speak in the
Sorry, I
previous
missed that.
if you heard her speak in the last session, she was talking about we are bringing in designers from around the world to not just design the exhibitions for us, but also wayfinding. And I have an architect sitting in front of me. These are very critical things one thinks about in this day and age. So we are addressing it.
Yes. And the third thing was creative industries as a whole. So it's not just visual arts, but I think a multi-streaming right from primary education and not just the visual medium, because then we are automatically having a cutoff right there. Thank you very much.
I can.
Thank you so much for that insightful talk. It's wonderful to know that you're going to be having a museum in Malaysia. I was just wondering that would you be expanding into South Asian art as well? Or is it just going to kind of be about Malaysian art?
I'm going to the intention is to include South Asian art, but Lydia will give you more details.
I think initially we want to start locally and expand out regionally, and then also understand how that's like building a web, as I used the metaphor earlier, and build out from there. I think we have to, make sure that our core audiences, our immediate, the people living in the area, people living in the wider metropolitan area, you know, can come to the museum and automatically see something they feel connected to. And then we can then take the next step of connecting the local to the regional to the international. So I think that's the kind of process of the journey rather than bringing something from the outside to start off with. We've been debating what the first artwork that should be seen when you walk in the museum. So, I think like the journey of of wayfinding, we're also thinking about the journey of what people see and in what sequence.
And subject to Lydia's views on this, of course, but I think I can speak for Brummel and to say that we are hoping that this museum will also somewhat showcase the soft power that India had and its influence into Southeast Asia, starting, I would say, from 3rd century CE onwards. I mean, Suresh Kumar can correct me. Professor Suresh Kumar from NUS, he's here. 3rd century. And what we see in South Asia, the monuments in South Asia, I should just mention that most recently, I think it was early this year or last year, they discovered a 6th century fully intact Buddhist statue dating and in full form, and it was such an exciting find. There's so much more to be explored, and I'm really hoping that our museum will touch on those topics as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a last question to take? Otherwise, thank you. I'm really excited
One last
for this.
question.
Oh, we have one last question. Sorry.
So, there's a lot of discussion about how do we get young people to come to the museums, right? So, I'm not young anymore, but just thinking about what would take me to a museum is an experience, right? The point you raised was, when you go abroad, people check out the MoMAs and all of that stuff. Why doesn't it happen in India? So, just wanted to ask all the panelists in terms of what do you think about an experience you want to create that could bring someone who wants to attend a stand-up comedy to maybe an arts museum.
Should I take it?
It's for the panelists, not the moderator.
So, as we are getting ready to open our doors for the larger KNMA 2.0, as we are calling it, in 2.5 to 3 years from now, we are thinking about these very seriously. So, for example, you could come to the Museum for Performing Arts. We'll have 2 auditoriums, 600-seater and a 150-seater. So we'll be curating shows that may appeal to some. We'll have some, let's say, one of the best restaurants. So if you want to bring a friend, you could come for that. You could come to our cafe. You could come just to hang out. There'll be, as Mrs. Nadar had said, we'll have like 27 galleries. There'll be some that'll be completely free. And then there'll be some special exhibitions that might be ticketed. So at any given point, you can come and you can engage as much as you want. And some exhibitions will speak to you and some won't. And some are going to be very popular. Like if we have an immersive show, then it's everybody comes. We had one called The Songline last year from Australia. And we had the largest footfall KNMA has had ever in history. So it could be that, or it could be Kusama's Infinity Room, where you'll have lines around the block and people are willing to buy tickets to go through that experience. So it is multifaceted.
And I think I'll just tie into the earlier question to say, I think that experience creation really does come from combining aspects of all the creative industries, all the creative arts, so to speak, so that people can contextualize each of those art forms and artworks and have that full faceted experience that is much more fascinating, much more immersive than immersive, not just in the art sense, but just in terms of losing yourself in art and in the experience. But I think the future is in capable hands here with this panel here. And thank you very much for sharing your insights. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mina.